I think so. Okay, maybe. All right, there you are. Okay, all right. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. Occasionally I have a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos. I'll talk more about that in the future when that comes back around. I'm going to skip a month or two. The last one had a lot of photos in it and was great. And you guys sent in a lot of pollinator photos, and I'm going to repurpose those at some point on some other things that I'm working on. So I appreciate your participation in that. I've got sun like right there, but it's about to duck behind a tree. I think the light will change as this video goes on. I put 2 videos up on the Garden Plants channel this past week. If you aren't subscribed to the Garden Plants with Jim Putnam channel, I'll link it down below. I think it's maybe always be linked below. I can't remember if I've done that. I probably should, but I think that channel, by the time you see this video on Sunday, it'll probably be over 5,000 subscribers. So thank you very much for those who have been subscribing over there at the new channel. And the purpose of that channel is it's just all single individual plant videos. I've got some other ideas about putting those videos into longer videos later. You'll see that when that starts to happen. But I've also got those videos divided into playlists, like a lot of playlists. So if you live in zone 6 and you want zone 6 sun plants only, there's a playlist on that channel for zone 6 sun plants. Same thing with zone 5, zone 7, zone 8, zone 9, zone 10. I've been dividing it up. If you want gold foliage plants for zone 5, there's a playlist. May only have 1 plant in it so far, but it'll eventually build out over time. So I'm organizing that channel very differently than I originally did this one. And so I think people will be able to go and really dive into something in particular they're looking for and compare things that will grow in their area that have the feature that they're looking for: shade, sun, yellow, purple, flowering, whatever. What else? We have a potential frost here this coming week or next week, but I'm in the city, in the urban space here, and so maybe out in these suburbs they'll get some frost, but I doubt I'll get one here yet. We will get one, probably within the next 2 weeks or so. But everything out here, I've got so many things that look great. I'm actually surrounded by bumblebees here in the Saturday afternoon, mid to late Saturday afternoon. Everything, a lot of the annuals still look great. I've got lots and lots of pansies out in the driveway. Some portion of these annual beds will be flipped out this week, and there'll be some video content on that. I was in Fairhope, Alabama for a group of nurserymen coming together to look at the plants in the Southern Living Plant Collection, new things that are coming. I shot 2 videos from that. Those videos will be up this week, and it's just like, it had not all the plants by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of the plants in the Southern Living Plant Collection in one space at one time. So again, I'll have those videos up this week. There's some things I couldn't show you in that because it's a year or 2 before a lot of them are coming out, but a lot of exciting stuff there. And there were a lot of nurserymen that were down there that were looking at those items to grow. So hopefully they will. And as I'm showing them to you guys, you'll be able to find them, because that's an important part of this. This sun is on this white paper and it's bright. Let's see. I asked last week, in last week's video, I talked about deer resistant plants, because I kind of stopped talking about it somewhat on the channel. And then I asked everybody to participate down below by naming deer-resistant plants in their landscapes if you had experience with deer. That was kind of important. It wasn't a guessing thing. This was actually experience from you guys. And so a lot of experienced gardeners who have deer issues listed things down at the bottom. Steph has gone through and compiled all those comments. And so we're going to have a video this coming week. And it's basically going to be a deer-resistant list from very experienced gardeners. The things that will be on it won't have been mentioned once. They'll have to be mentioned many times in order to make the final video. So it will be, again, I don't want to put something in there that was only mentioned once in all of those comments, because, that doesn't seem like it has any kind of backup to that. But if it was mentioned 4, 5, 6 times, it will be in that video. So hopefully that video will be helpful. Just a composite of all that data that you guys gave us last week. So thank you for that. And let's see, let's talk about some questions from that video. There's so many comments, sometimes it's hard to dig through the actual questions, but I did, and I think I have about 20 of them. So let's get started. So somebody's bought plants. You know, people are buying plants on sale and that kind of thing. Don't know if they can get them in the ground. Talked about this several times. If you bought plants that are very hardy in your area, so I'm in zone 7, if it's a zone 5 hardy plant, I can pretty much just leave that plant out over the winter and probably not have any issue with it. Just some light protection, maybe throw some leaves up around it. If it's something that's marginally hardy in your area, you're losing at least a zone of hardiness by having it, possibly 2 zones of hardiness, depending on the winter you're having, of hardiness for that plant. Having it above the ground rather than in the ground where the roots are protected. So it might be that you bring those things in the garage on really cold nights and leave them outside otherwise. You can pack stuff together. You can put a sheet over them on the coldest nights. You can pile leaves up around the containers. A lot of different ways you can protect them. But what you're trying to defend against is the pot freezing solid and staying frozen solid like all day. Like I had plants at my nursery that they would freeze overnight even under the covers, like the soil would. But because they were under the covers, it was like a greenhouse the next day, and they were heating up enough to thaw out and make sure they had some water every day. You don't want them frozen solid and then staying that way for 24, 48, 3 days, however many hours it ends up being. So having a cover or leaves or some sort of insulation around them that allows them to, they can freeze, but to thaw out, that's important. Okay, somebody had a bunch of mature or things that have been in the ground for a while were planted way too deep. And so they realized it and they started digging that soil out. And now all their plants are in a bit of a bowl. And, what to do about that? There's not really anything you can do about it. I would just mulch them regularly, just like you would always do, just not too deep. And being careful that the mulch isn't always washing down into those to those lower spaces. I think it will be somewhat correcting over time. I think the root flare from those trees will start to fill in some of that space as the trunks of your trees get bigger. I think it'll be less of an issue down the road, but it is a weird thing to have a little bit of a bowl. If you can't raise them up, if you physically can't raise them up at this point, you just got to live with it. Mulch them like you always would, and unless the plants are showing stress from, most plants, unless it's an area where the water will literally stand in that little bowl that's been created, a lot of plants will probably thrive if given a little bit of extra water like they're going to get, as long as nothing's up on them, girdling them. And again, I think it will visually correct itself over some period of time, but I don't, there's no good answer to this. Just mulch it like you normally would. That little indention it's just there. It's there until it's not. But don't fill it back in with anything. If you did want to fill it back in with something, it'd be pine bark. If pine bark was available in your area, you could get away with pine bark on top of the roots more than other things. Okay, but I wouldn't. Let's see. Should you fertilize? Okay, so somebody wanted to know if they should fertilize their wood chips. They got some, they were pine tree wood chips. And of course, then you start reading on the internet that the wood chips are going to steal all your nitrogen from your plants, and your plants are all going to struggle. And should you add fertilizer, nitrogen to it to help with that? One thing in their question was they were putting the wood chips down now and they weren't planting till spring. And so no, I don't think you need any additional fertilizer. I fertilize in February, March, so I might fertilize the whole area at that time, because that's typically what I do, is just fertilize the whole area out here once a year. So I might fertilize it then. But that's one of those things in horticulture that's really overblown, and I've said it before. Yes, the wood chips require some nitrogen to break down, and they'll steal it from the easiest source they can find it, but then it re-releases as it composts, and so it's a very temporary, minor issue. Again, it's kind of overblown, but there are plants that are more sensitive to it than others, and so there are plants out here that going into the wood chips, I could tell would have preferred not to go directly into them. They would have preferred to have it composted a little more than it originally was. And my purple foliage hibiscus that are always on the other side of the fence out there went directly into wood chips and really struggled early on in the season. Some of them over there are 8 feet tall now, but I didn't show them off as much this year because it was a wood chip related issue. So again, some plants are more sensitive to it than others. So there is that. It is a real thing, but it tends to be overblown on the internet. All you need to do is have those wood chips break down a little bit, and then it's over. You can plant in them. So putting them down now, fertilize in February or March like you normally would, and then start planting in April or May, and you'll be fine. Holly's enjoying her time out on a 72-ish degree day, laying in the grass over here beside me. Somebody asked how small they can cut up liriope when they're dividing it. We used to get bibs of liriope that were no more than an inch squares, probably maybe 1 by 2 inch pieces when we ordered it into the nursery. There's a guy down in Georgia that sends it out to lots of growers, and I couldn't beat its price. It was like, I don't remember how much it was back then. It was like 7 or 8 cents for, you know, just a little square piece of the underground part of liriope, and they would always come up. But I was putting those into a soil mix in a container and fertilizing it, and, you know, taking good care of it. If you were dividing it out into the ground, I'd probably want at least a 2 by 2 piece, something like that. I probably wouldn't cut it much smaller than that. And then yes, you can space them 12 inches apart or 18 inches apart or whatever you want to when you replant them in the ground. But I'd probably do a slightly larger chunk transplanting from ground to ground, as opposed to what I was doing from him was from ground to container and then growing it out for a couple years and then selling it as a full 1 gallon container. Okay, somebody said, should all perennials be cut back in late winter? All is an impossible thing in horticulture. It just is. There's just no, I can't say all, but yes, the vast majority of perennials that haven't died completely back to the ground on their own, some that leave a little bit of dead wood up, it's best to leave those things up through the winter because birds use the seed on them. There might be some overwintering beneficial insects on those plants, that kind of thing. So yeah, when the plant starts to break dormancy in the spring, that's probably the most ideal time to cut those things like bee balm and some of the cone flowers and things that stay a little bit woody during the winter time. That's probably the best time to do it. Other perennials like hosta, you know, that don't end up with woody stems, they just melt so much back to the ground that there's almost nothing to clean up on those. Of course, things that are the evergreen perennials like hellebores, you know, they get cut back at that time. The carex, you know, grasses and grass-like plants, you know, you cut them back then. So most everything that doesn't die back completely, yeah, it does get a haircut at that time of year, but I would hate to be on here going, yes, everything, but a lot of it, you know, most everything that's in this landscape, I would say would fit into that category, things that stay woody. That's the time I would get in there and clean them up, would be late winter or when they start breaking dormancy in the spring. But I think I covered the evergreen perennials, the kind of liquid perennials, that's, you know, things like hosta that just literally, they just disappear, the whole mass. And then you've got things like salvia that stay kind of woody through the winter. Those you can, you know, cut them back when they start to show some signs of life in the early spring or slightly earlier than that. That's fine. Okay, so somebody has an American holly, and the person that owned the house before them had kept it as a 5-foot round ball. They want to allow it to become, you know, an American holly tree, which is what, you know, generally they are. They're allowing it to grow back, but it's just got one spindly piece coming out of the top of it. I think if you get about 3 or 4 or 5 feet of growth on the top of it, you can, what I frequently did on plants at the nursery was I'd get 2 feet of growth on something, and I'd take 6 or 8 inches of that growth off, and that would force additional growth down lower. And so, you know, every time that leader puts on another 2 feet of growth, you know, take about 6 inches off of that, and that will allow the rest of the plant to kind of catch up a little bit. I think that's what you're going to have to do. I don't know how shady it is. If it's an extremely shady place, which American hollies will grow in, it may try and stretch and always be leggy, and you're going to have to continue to do a little bit of pruning on it as long as you can reach it in order to hopefully have some fullness to it as it gets bigger. Okay, so Somebody asked me if ligustrum is invasive. They have some large ones, and of course they have seedlings coming up everywhere. Yeah, I mean, a Chinese ligustrum, Japanese ligustrum. So far, sunshine ligustrum, which is a Chinese privet, is doesn't flower and is seed free. But pretty much across the board, some definitely more than others. The straight ligustrum japonicum seeds itself like mad, where recurvifolium gets some seed, but not as much. Still invasive, but not as much seed on it. So there's a little variability in that, but Chinese privet is probably, I don't think you go into any wooded area in America and not see Chinese privet in the woods. It's run amok. And then they were asking if it should still be used. And I mean, the answer to it at this point, and I've said this before, nobody likes this type of answer, is how would we ever get rid of it? I think it's going to continue to always be used. It's too late to ban it. Hopefully in the future we'll see some more seed-free options on lots of plants. We're seeing that on barberries. We're seeing that on buddleia. Some of our other invasives, which buddleia and barberries aren't invasive for me. But you go up to Connecticut and barberries are everywhere, and you go to the Pacific Northwest and buddleia are everywhere. Butterfly bushes are everywhere. It's weird how something can be invasive in one area and not in another. But so I don't know how to answer that question. There's no nursery that I could go to between here and the Gulf that wouldn't have Japanese ligustrum for sale. It's a staple in this industry, and they've already taken over the world. I've always figured that at some point, some disease, some insect, something will balance the scale. It can't remain disease and insect free forever. And something will eventually balance the scale on it. But for now, yes, they're invasive. No, there's not anything we could do about it. I pull lots out here. I don't have any in this planted in this landscape, but the seed's everywhere. I've got one that's 40 feet tall. I don't know if we could see that. Let's see. I'm going to turn this over here and put this thing back and show you this. That, my friends, is a Japanese ligustrum that's 40 feet tall. It's not in this yard. I can't, not mine to do anything about, but that's probably 100,000 plus seeds up there. I don't know how well you can see that, but what could I do to combat that? Absolutely nothing. So hopefully that works out where you guys can see that, but it's nothing but seed up there. So again, they're going to continue to be sold. There's nothing, what else is there to say about it, really? The damage is done. Okay, so somebody bought Osmanthus fragrans. They're in my zone, which is zone 7B. I've got 3 Osmanthus fragrans as part of my screen over here. They wanted to know if they should plant them now. As long as they're not in big open space, yeah, they're totally fine. If you see, the zone hardiness on them is going to be 8 to 11. We don't have any problem growing them here in the city of Raleigh in zone 7B, none whatsoever. But you're right to ask the question about fall planting them, because I wouldn't fall plant one out by, in my most open space in this landscape. But if it's in a slightly protected space from the wind, I'd go ahead and put it in the ground. It's probably better in the ground than it is in the container. But you just know that you need to have a sheet on standby or something that you can throw over it on nights that, let's say, get below 20 during the winter, which is, here in Raleigh, maybe 5 nights all winter, I would hope. Hope it's not many more than that, but at the most, like 5 nights it would need to be protected. Okay, so somebody asked what size air compressor they should use to blow out their irrigation. I think I've said it in a video before about just hooking up an air compressor to one end of it and blowing as much of the water out of it as you can. I don't think the size of the air compressor matters all that much, or the cost. They were talking about trying to save money on the air compressor. I have a very small air compressor in the shed back there, and it didn't cost me very much. Most of the cost in an air compressor, this is an electric one. Most of the cost in an air compressor is the storage ability of the air compressor. So how much how frequently it comes on and turns on and off. If you ever hear guys working in the your neighborhood, you know, you hear that air compressor come on occasionally. But you know, a big air compressor, you can, you know, put 50 nails in the house between the times that the air compressor is coming on. With a little tiny one like I have, while you're filling a tire or whatever, the air compressor's running. And so that's really the only issue. So you can buy an inexpensive air compressor. Long story short, you can buy an inexpensive air compressor to blow your irrigation out. You don't have to break the bank on it. It's really an air storage issue and how frequently it's making tons of noise. You know, obviously the bigger one's also going to probably have more PSI as well. Somebody's going to call me out on that, but you don't need that much PSI to blow a little water out of an irrigation line. So the small one will be fine to answer that question. Okay, let's see. Somebody's got invasive plants in their neighbor's garden, and they, you know, just trying to figure out how to defend against that a bit. And that's what I just showed you over here. My neighbor back here has some Bermuda grass back there, and I put up a Bermuda grass video this past week about it being my least favorite weed in the garden. My neighbor's got some over there, and I've just been continuing to put some wood chips between that chain link fence and our plantings on this side. So I've got a thick layer of mulch over there that's kind of my defense spot, and I can go through there and clean up anything that's trying to creep over here. But I do have a designated mulch spot. I would not put ground cover things up against that fence on my side, because that Bermuda would creep into it and it'd almost immediately be ruined. And I couldn't get the Bermuda out of it. So it goes back to that video I shot earlier this week. So I have a defensive barrier of mulch, and you know, based on who you are as a gardener, you could either spray that line occasionally, or you could use a hoe, you know, some sort of weeding hoe, which is what I do, and just quickly go along there and cut anything that's tried to grow into that mulch barrier. Okay, somebody asked me if they're high pH water, meaning 9.3 water, would be, you know, how much should be using it to water their plants. But their actual soil pH is 6.8, which is like nearly a perfect soil pH for most plants. Like 6.5 is kind of that sweet spot where most plants can grow. You know, plants that like acidic soil, and plants that, you know, don't mind alkaline soils. That's 6.5 to 7 in there. So they got great soil, but then they're watering it with 9.3 water. It would take forever for that water to actually change your soil pH. It's not going to make that much of a difference changing your pH. I probably not going to spray it over top of the plants. I probably want to water from below as much as possible. Continuing to mulch. You know, most of your mulch that you're putting down, you know, things that compost back towards 7. When you fertilize, you might want to be using something like Hollytone or some sort of fertilizer for acid-loving plants, because that sulfur that's going to be in that product can maybe help balance some of that alkalinity in that water. And then ideally, something I haven't pointed out on this channel is that garden cart that's in so many of the videos sits under the overhang of the house on the back corner here, and a few other things. We actually collect a lot of rainwater, and most of our containers are watered by rainwater here. And so we try as little as possible to break the water hose out here and to use the city's water on anything. So we actually collect water here on site from the roof. And use that water. So that's another strategy I'd be using if I were you. If you're in an area that gets kind of regular rainfall, is to set up some sort of gutter system to trap some of your water. You know, there's all kinds of systems for that. You know, for collecting it in garbage cans and better looking cans and wheelbarrows and whatever you want to capture it in. But Steph and I always have a place where we can bucket water from for these plants, as long as we're getting some rain here or there. So some strategies I would use would be that, and again, watering from underneath when you're watering with your 9.3 water. But it's not going to change the pH all that much. It takes a long time for pH to change. You know, things like adding lime or sulfur, the things that people want to do to actually change their soil pH, have very little impact, or they have very short-term impacts, and it comes back to where it was before pretty quickly. Okay, somebody asked me about limbing up Esperanza. This is another thing about using Latin names versus common names, and I am guilty of this more than probably almost anybody. I mean, I use way too many common names, and I want people to understand what I'm saying on the channel, but sometimes, you know, the only reason I'm pointing this out is because Esperanza goes by yellow bells, and if you're, you know, this is a more of a tropical plant, Florida plant, but Forsythia here goes by yellow bells, and so if I say yellow bells, people are going to think I'm talking about Forsythia. So this is the common name issue that we have in plants. But yes, you can. They wanted to know if they could just limb it up into a tree. They actually look best as trees, so they have some limbs just kind of sprawling out on the ground. Yeah, I'd start limbing it up into a tree. I've seen them in tree form, and they're quite beautiful. Okay, so somebody has they have leaves dropping into a bed that has a Japanese maple every year, and then they're mulching it, and the mulch is getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and wanted to know if it would cause any problems. Yeah, eventually it's too much mulch. That multi-day landscape job that I did right over here, I think it has 4 parts. I've actually shot the 5th part and it hasn't gone up, and then I'm going to do a final tour over there. That place had mulch that was about 1.5 feet thick, and I didn't mulch. It's been mulched now, and that job looks great. I really do need to show it off. I didn't mulch for like the 9 months that project was going on over there on purpose, because the mulch was ridiculously thick. The landscaper had come back, I think, every 6 months and did 4 more inches of mulch. I think they were charging them, charging them by the yard, clearly. But yes, there is a moment in time where you just start literally burying your plants too much, and it's just unnatural. I mean, these trees back here, as much stuff as they're dropping, you know, the earthworms and the the fungi and the bacteria, and other, roly-polies and everything else are back there breaking that stuff down pretty quickly. It's not like it's building up into this giant thick mass back there even in the wooded areas. So yeah, there's a point where it's too much, and you can go in there and rake some of it out before you remulch one time, and just thin it down a bit. And then put that stuff on your compost pile, and then plant your annuals or something, or vegetables in it later, is the way to go. But there can be too much of a good thing. Yes. Okay. Somebody asked me about planting bulbs in containers now or wait until December. I probably will wait until I have a little more cold than I have now. I think things like daffodils that don't need many chill hours would try to come up if I added moisture and I added good soil conditions. I added a little bit of heat from the sunlight, because it's still quite warm. I mean, I'm in shorts and a short sleeve shirt, and October 15th is when I'm shooting this. So yeah, I'm going to wait a little while longer, and certainly if it's anything that got cold treated, like you had tulips in the refrigerator or something, those would immediately come up if you put them in a container at this point. So yeah, I'll probably wait to sometime at mid-November-ish, when the nighttime temperatures are pretty consistently cool, before I would put them in containers outside, because those containers can really heat up from the sun during the day. Again, I talk about them being vulnerable to cold. Well, they're also vulnerable to the daytime temperatures of warming as well. So they might try to come up. I'll wait a little while. Let's see. So a question about mist timer. So they got propagation set up, and I can't remember where this was. This was in a foreign country, and I don't remember where it was now. I wish I had written that down. So they put in a mist timer for their propagation, and it runs 10 seconds about every 20 minutes. They want to increase the frequency that it's coming on, because 20 minutes, the foliage. So basically with a mist propagation system, we're taking cuttings off a plant. So they're taking a 4-inch little piece of a plant, we're sticking it in some soil, and then we have a mist irrigation system above it. And so just a little fog of water is falling on the leaves of those plants to keep them wet, because they don't have any roots. So we have to keep the leaves wet on them. So that basically his system is coming on, and it's running for 10 seconds every 20 minutes. But in between the 20 minutes, the leaves are drying out too much. and he wants to know how to increase it without overwatering the soil. You have to greatly decrease the amount of time that's on. 10 seconds is way too long for a mist to run. I hope your clock will allow you to go down way under 10 seconds, but I don't think it needs to come on maybe more than 3 or 4 seconds and then run it every 7 or 8 minutes. That's probably about what I ran it. Again, depends on where you are, what your humidity is outside. It's something that every individual has to play around with a bit. But what we're trying to do is keep a film of water on the leaves without bogging, without overwatering the soil that we've got them stuck into that we're waiting for roots to root into. So there's a delicate balance there, but having it come on for 10 seconds at the time is going to keep the soil too wet. And then the fact that it's 20 minutes apart is going to keep the foliage too dry. So kind of the opposite, literally the opposite of what we're trying to do. So decrease the amount of time in between and substantially decrease the length of time that the water's on. All we want to do is get a brief film on it. I mean, if that only takes 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever that is, and then pick up your flats occasionally, your trays occasionally, and see how heavy they are, and you'll know whether or not you're overwatering. You know, the volume of water is too much. So yeah, but your thinking is correct. You got to get the time closer together, but you got to get the length of time that it's running cut substantially down. Okay, so somebody rooted some Shindo viburnum. Here's another rooting cuttings question. They rooted some Shindo viburnum, want to know how many they should stick in each pot to fill them out quicker. 1, 3 would fill them out quicker, but just plant 1 and take your time with this. I am not happy with the current state of nurseries around the country putting 3 plants in every pot so that they can fill them out quicker. Lots of my friends do it, and I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, those 3 plants, they can compete against each other in that container, and they can compete with each other in the ground for some period of time, but eventually one's going to die at some point. They're going to kill each other somewhere down the road. 2 of them are going to kill the third one, or one of them's going to kill the other 2. And it just, yes, it's faster. And I understand the point in a nursery business of trying to grow something as fast as possible, but I'd rather put 1 individual cutting into it, wait an additional few months to be able to sell it, is the way it should be done. But so 1, but 3 would be faster, 5, 7, obviously 100. 100 would be the fastest, but 1. Okay. Somebody asked me how I'm liking my Autumn Brilliance serviceberry, the Amelanchier that's planted in the front garden. Fantastic. I love it. It's been over at about a 20-degree angle because I took the stake out of it and then got a hurricane or a tropical storm Ian. Bent it over, so I've got to put the stake back in it, but it looks great other than that. But I have complained in general, another nursery complaint here, about trees being sold that are 6 feet tall that have very little caliper on them, including that redbud behind me. It's still staked. You can't see the stake behind it, and it's going to sleep, so it doesn't look its best right now, but it will in a couple weeks. I mean, actually, when it loses its leaves, it's beautiful in the wintertime. But that thing is going to be staked for a long time. It's super small caliper, and it's probably 7 feet tall back there. Same thing with that serviceberry. I'm going to have to restake it, but I love the tree, and the tree looks great. I did some hard pruning on it earlier this year to try to get the caliper caught up with its height. I'm probably going to have to do that again next year, just to thicken the trunk of it up. But it's going to have to stay staked through the winter. I got to do that in the next few days. Let's see, few more here. So much time I got. Okay, this camera turns off at 30 minutes. It's genius. I have no idea why. I wish they would get rid of the recording limit on it, but for some reason, 30 minutes, then I have to walk over there and turn it off and turn it back on. So if you ever see a 33-minute question and answer video, at some point, I had to walk over there and turn it back on. Okay, somebody asked about planting around sprinkler lines. So they've got an underground irrigation system, and they want to put some plants over it or near it, and would those plants damage the irrigation system? In all likelihood, no. Even if they did, it'd be such a long period of time. Most of those buried lines are either Schedule 40 PVC, which is the thicker wall PVC. Hopefully they didn't bury the thin wall PVC. or it's the polyethylene pipe, the black pipe that they'll use the pipe puller, that vibrating pipe puller to put that black pipe in the ground. And either that, especially that polyethylene, there's no way that roots are gonna, I mean, roots would have a hard time doing anything with that. And most of your water lines running to your house now are probably that polyethylene pipe, or the Schedule 40 PVC. It shouldn't hurt them. And if it did, gosh, it's gonna be so far in the future, you'll have probably long abandoned that irrigation system at that point. Your biggest concern will be digging the holes for the plants without busting the pipes yourself with your shovel. You're probably a bigger threat to it than the plants are. Okay, let's see, pruning. Okay, so somebody did a nursery tour, and the nursery had set out a bunch of leggy camellias that they were throwing away or giving away for free. They got them, wanted to know if they should go ahead and prune them. I would wait, I would put them in the ground and let them start to get some growth on them next year, and then do some pruning. I generally won't take an unhealthy or stressed root-bound plant and immediately start hacking on it or pruning on it. I want to try to get it back a little bit happy. So I'm going to plant that plant, break the roots up a little bit, and then next spring or early summer when I'm seeing some new growth on it, that's when I'll be comfortable to prune it. I just don't like to double down stress. If you take a stressed plant and let me stress it 5 more ways. Let me plant it, bust the roots up and prune it in half. You know, that's a lot of stresses going on an already stressed plant. They didn't throw it away for no reason. And obviously it wasn't in the best of shape. Thank you guys for following along with the channel and watching the videos. And I think this coming week, I've got pansies, like I say, pansies going in. I've got 2 videos from the Deep South with all the plants from the Southern Living Plant Collection, Encore Azaleas and the Sunset Plant Collection. And there's definitely another video. So there'll be a lot of content this week. Thanks for watching.